I've been working as a park ranger at Algonquin Provincial Park for many years now, and during that time I've seen a lot of animals like bears, moose, and even the occasional lynx. But there's one night that stands out from all the rest, a night that left me feeling shaken. It was late August, the kind of night where the heat of summer still hangs in the air, and the forest is buzzing with life. I remember driving along my usual patrol route and making sure all the campers were safe and following the park rules. The moon was shining brightly, casting its light through the trees, and despite it being nighttime, everything was clear as day. The air felt strange, like something was about to happen, even though the sky was clear of any storms. As I cruised down the old service road, enjoying the cool breeze blowing through the open windows of my truck, I heard a howl. But this wasn't just any howl, it was different, unlike any wolf's howl I'd ever heard before. It gave me pause, but I brushed it off as probably just some sick animal in the woods. Still, I slowed down, just to be safe. Then, as I rounded a bend, my headlights illuminated something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a person standing by the side of the road. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It stood on two legs, covered in dark, tangled fur, and towering at least 7 feet tall. Now, I've heard stories about the dogman, a mysterious creature said to roam the forests of North America, but I never thought much of them. That is, until that night. The creature turned its head towards me, its eyes reflecting the moonlight with an eerie intelligence. It wasn't like any wild animal I'd ever encountered, and it felt like it was studying me or sizing me up. I stopped the truck, unsure of what to do, and turned on my hazard lights. The creature just stood there staring at me with those unnerving eyes. Then, it did something that sent shivers down my spine. It bared its teeth in what might have been a smile, but it looked all wrong. Too many teeth, too sharp, and those claws, long and menacing. I thought, this is it. This is how it ends. But then, something strange happened. The creature tilted its head, almost like a curious dog, but there was nothing friendly in its gaze now. No smile. It felt like it was deciding what to do with me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, me frozen in fear and it with a disturbing curiosity. Then it made a sound, not a growl, but more like a deep, rumbling chuckle. It mocked my fear, relishing in it. Suddenly it stepped forward, and in the full moonlight, I could see its fur was tangled with debris, and it smelled of wet earth and something rotten. Its face resembled that of a wolf, but twisted and menacing. And then it did something that defied all logic. It spoke. Not in words, but in a guttural imitation of human speech. It was like it was trying to communicate, but failing miserably. The sound chilled me to the bone. I reached for the radio, but my hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. The creature leaned in closer, its eyes narrowing. I thought it was going to attack, but then another ranger's truck appeared down the road, its headlights piercing the darkness. The creature glanced toward the light, then back at me. There was a moment of hesitation, and then, with a menacing growl, it disappeared into the forest, leaving me shaken to my core. When the other ranger pulled up, he asked if I was all right, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him what I had seen. I couldn't explain the encounter with the dogman and the way it looked at me or the eerie sounds it made. Since that night, I've continued to patrol the park, always keeping an eye out for anything unusual. But every time I drive down that road, I can't shake the feeling of dread, wondering if those creatures are lurking in the shadows, waiting to be discovered. And I've been dropping subtle hints to the other rangers, trying to gather information without directly asking. So far, nothing conclusive, but I'll keep you posted. Growing up with just my mom meant I often had to look out for her, even though I was just a teenager. That's how things were for us. We lived in Michigan, where my mom worked as the manager of this big lodge near Lake Michigan. She really put her heart into her job, and I remember tagging along sometimes, seeing how much effort she put into keeping everything running smoothly. The lodge sat close to one of the bays off the lake, and it was a beautiful spot, especially with the snowy winters. But her job kept her there late, sometimes until past midnight. During one winter break when I was about 15, I started walking down to the lodge to meet her after work. Mom didn't like walking home alone in the dark, so I'd take our dogs and go meet her. It was a nice way to spend time together and make sure she got home safely. I didn't mind the walk since it was only about 15 minutes, and I'd usually be up late anyway, playing video games or hanging out with friends. Plus, I could get the dog's evening walk done at the same time. So one night, Mom had a lot of paperwork to finish up, and I didn't want to just sit around waiting. I decided to take the dogs for a walk around the lodge grounds. It was cold and quiet, with the winter night wrapping everything in stillness. The lodge was quiet and everyone was asleep inside. The only sounds were the crunch of snow underfoot and the whistle of the wind. The grounds were pretty vast, stretching out toward the water's edge. As we walked along the path surrounded by thick trees, something felt off and the dogs sensed it too, growling and bristling. I looked ahead and saw a figure among the trees, not quite clear but definitely there, and it made my skin prickle with unease. I knew we needed to leave, fast. Turning back towards the lodge, my heart hammered in my chest. My mind raced with all sorts of terrifying scenarios, and I imagined shadows lurking, waiting to pounce on us. Then, out of nowhere, something huge burst from the trees. It moved fast, way faster than any person. Then my dogs went berserk, barking wildly. Thankfully, they were on leashes, or they would have dashed off after whatever it was. The thing towered over me, easily 8 feet tall, and its presence chilling. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing, and it seemed like something from a nightmare, with tattered flesh hanging off it, and eyes that glowed red for a fleeting moment. It felt wrong, unnatural, like it didn't belong in our world. Like a creature from the depths of horror stories. I stood there, frozen with fear, unable to move. I felt its gaze lingering, like it was watching us from the shadows. The fear was overwhelming, paralyzing, and it gripped me, rooted me to the spot. My mind screamed with questions, but my body wouldn't respond. We weren't far from the water, and suddenly I heard it retreating, crashing through the trees towards the lake. The sound was deafening, like a nightmare made real. Relief washed over me as it disappeared into the night. I turned and practically ran back to the lodge, the dogs in tow. Every nerve in my body screamed with urgency. When we finally reached safety, I collapsed inside, trembling and out of breath. All I wanted was to lock the door and forget the whole ordeal. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I was always on edge, always watching for something lurking in the shadows. It was hard to explain to Mom just how terrifying it had been, and how could she understand something she hadn't experienced. I was relieved when Mom changed jobs and we moved to a quieter suburb. It felt like a fresh start, away from whatever lurked in the darkness of that Michigan lodge. Once upon a time, there I was, working the night shift again. Eli's a tiny place nestled in eastern Nevada, and it was built long ago as a stop for the Pony Express. Pretty neat history, right? But these days, not much goes down here usually, but that night would be different to say the least. I got a call about some racket at this old deserted house on the edge of town. I figured it was probably just kids messing around thinking they're brave. I drove over there, the headlights of my patrol car slicing through the darkness. The house, it's this ancient falling apart thing, has been empty for ages. People say it's haunted, but I'm not one to believe in ghosts. Anyway, I parked and got out. The night was real quiet, just the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel. I shone my flashlight around, calling out and expecting some teenager to come out feeling sheepish, but nothing. The place was silent except for the wind. I walked up to the house, the wood creaking under my feet. The door was open a crack, which was weird, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was stale, and it was even quieter inside, so I called out again, but got no response. Just then, I heard something upstairs, like a scuffle, then a thump. I thought, great, someone's here, so I started up the stairs real slow, trying not to make a peep. When I got to the top, I saw it. This thing, it wasn't human. It was huddled in the corner. Its skin was pale, almost white, and it looked starved and really skinny. Its eyes, they were this glowing pale blue, and they were fixed right on me. I've seen some wild stuff, being a cop, but this was different. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I didn't know what to do. It just stared at me, not moving. Then it let out this sound like a hiss, but deeper. It was the most unsettling thing I've ever heard. I stepped back slowly because I didn't want to make it mad. But as I moved, it moved too, like it was copying me. Its movements were jerky and unnatural. I kept my flashlight on it, not daring to look away. Then, the darn floorboard creaked under me. The creature, it moved so fast and it was a blur. One second it was there in the dim light of my flashlight, and the next, it just vanished into the darkness of the old house. I stood there for a moment but didn't stick around too long. I made my way back to the cruiser, my mind racing. What was that thing? It wasn't like any animal I knew. And those eyes. I couldn't get the image of those glowing pale blue eyes out of my head. Back at the station, I didn't know what to say. How could I explain this? Who would believe me? I decided to keep it simple and reported some disturbance, checked it out, found nothing. The guys at the station joked about me being spooked by an old house. I laughed along, but inside I was still shaken. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to know more. What if that thing was dangerous? What if it wasn't alone? I started doing some digging, and it turns out there are legends, stories about creatures like that. They call them crawlers in the tales. Pale, fast, not quite human. But they were just stories, right? Things to spook kids around campfires. But I had seen one with my own eyes. The next few nights I was back on the graveyard shift, so I couldn't avoid it. And anyway, I had to go back to that house. I needed to know if it was still there or if it was real. Each night I drove past the house, slowing down, trying to catch a glimpse of something, but there was nothing, just an old, empty house. Then, on the third night, something changed. As I drove by, I saw movement in the upstairs window. It was quick, just a shadow, but it was there. I parked the cruiser a little way down the road and walked back, my flashlight and gun at the ready. I approached the house, every sense on high alert. I entered and heard the familiar creak of the wood under my feet. It was cold inside, colder than it should have been. Then I made my way upstairs, slowly, cautiously. When I reached the top, I heard it before I saw it. A low, guttural growling coming from one of the rooms, so I approached, my flashlight leading the way. The growling grew louder, more intense. Then I pushed the door open, and there it was. The creature was there, crouched in the corner just like before, but this time it wasn't alone. There was another one with it, smaller, maybe a juvenile. They both stared at me, those eerie blue eyes glowing in the dark. I stood there frozen and didn't know what to do. Were they dangerous? What did they want? The growling stopped, and for a moment everything was silent. Then the smaller one moved towards me, not aggressively, but more curious. I kept still, not wanting to provoke them. It came closer, and I saw its features more clearly, and it was like nothing I had ever seen. Suddenly, the larger one made a sharp sound like a click, and the smaller one stopped, looked back, and then they both ran away from me and vanished into the shadows. Just like that, they were gone. I searched the room, but there was no sign of them. No way they could have left without me seeing. It was like they'd just disappeared. I left the house, my mind swirling with questions. What were they? Where did they come from? And why were they here in Ely? The thing is, I'll never know those answers because I never did go back to that house, and to this day, no one else has mentioned encountering anything there. So I just keep on with my job, patrolling and trying to keep the peace. Let's just hope it stays that way. Let me tell you about this wild adventure I had a few weeks ago. I'm a surveyor, which means I spend a lot of time in the deep woods of Oregon. Tall trees all around, leaves rustling and birds chirping far away. Now let me tell you about this one day when something really strange happened. I was out in the middle of nowhere, deep in the forest. It was so isolated, miles away from any town or city, and the owner of the land wanted it surveyed, which is a whole other story. Anyway, the woods were thick, and the air had that fresh, earthy smell you only get in the wilderness. I was doing my thing, measuring distances and taking notes, when I heard something odd. It was like a low rumbling sound, kind of like a hum but deeper. I stopped in my tracks, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, behind a bunch of trees. I know it might sound crazy, but I couldn't just ignore it, so I decided to check it out. Slowly, I made my way through the bushes, trying not to make a sound. As I got closer, the noise got clearer, and it sounded like some sort of rhythmic grunting. I peeked around a big tree and froze. What I saw was unbelievable. There, in a little open area, was this massive creature, covered in fur, bent over something on the ground, and it looked like something out of a storybook. Now, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it sure looked like a Sasquatch. You know, those big ape-like creatures people talk about seeing in the woods. It had its back to me, so it didn't notice me there. This thing was huge, like over 7 feet tall, with dark, messy fur. Its arms were like tree trunks, and its back was wide. I couldn't see all the details, but it was definitely something you don't see every day. I watched, amazed and a little scared, as it kept making those strange grunting sounds, picking stuff up from the ground now and then. My heart was pounding, and I knew I should probably back away slowly and get out of there. But I was frozen, like I couldn't move. I wanted to remember this moment, but I didn't have any cameras with me. So there I was, just standing there, watching this mysterious creature in the middle of the Oregon wilderness. As I stood there, feeling a mix of fear and wonder, the Sasquatch kept doing its thing in the clearing. It would take a few steps, then bend down to check out something on the ground. The grunts continued, making the whole scene even creepier. It was like the creature was doing some kind of ritual or something, but I couldn't figure it out. I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see something amazing, but I was still scared stiff. The creature was just so big and powerful, and I felt like I was intruding on its space. Suddenly it stopped what it was doing and looked around. Then my heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, hoping it hadn't seen me. Its dark eyes scanned the forest, and I felt like it could see right through me. I pressed myself against the tree, trying to blend in and not get caught. The creature stayed still for a moment, like it was deciding what to do. I was freaking out inside, not sure if I should run or stay put. Then it let out a deep growl, like a warning, so I knew I had to get out of there. Slowly, I backed away, making sure not to make a sound. The last thing I wanted was to make it mad. As I made my way back, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. Was it really a Sasquatch? I had to tell someone about this, or I'd go crazy. Getting back to camp felt like forever, and every little noise made me jump. When I finally got back, I told my buddies what happened. They listened, but I could tell they didn't really believe me. That night I couldn't sleep, and I knew I had to go back and investigate, but I was also scared of what I might find. The next morning, I made up my mind. I was going back to that clearing, but this time, I was going to be prepared. I grabbed a camera and some other gear and set off into the woods again. The journey back was nerve-wracking, and every sound made me jump, and the forest felt even scarier than before. When I finally reached the clearing, there was no sign of the creature. I spent hours there taking pictures and collecting samples, but it was like it had never been there. I never did see the Sasquatch again, and maybe that's a good thing, but I'll never forget that day in the Oregon wilderness. It's a memory I'll carry with me forever. I've got a story to tell you, and this tale isn't your typical spooky stuff in the woods kind of deal. Nope, it's way out there. But believe me when I say every bit of it is true. Now, I'm what you might call a security guard, but not your run-of-the-mill security guard. I keep watch at Pearson International Airport in Toronto. Yeah, the big one. Most of my shifts happen at night, which suits me just fine. Less people, less fuss. You see some interesting things in an airport late at night, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I encountered one night. It was a quiet Tuesday, around 2 a.m., strangely quiet, even for that hour. My job mainly involves patrolling the quieter corners of the terminal, making sure no one's sneaking a nap in a closed coffee shop or something. As I was strolling past one of those big windows overlooking the runway, that's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was this figure out there on the tarmac. Now, people aren't supposed to be out there, especially not at 2 a.m. This figure, it was strange, not like anyone I'd ever seen, and it was sort of shimmering, like looking at something through a heat wave. I figured maybe it was just a reflection, but nope, it was still there when I rubbed my eyes and looked again. This time it seemed closer to the window, almost like it moved while I blinked. I decided to check it out, following protocol, so I made my way through the terminal and out one of the side exits leading to the runway. It was chilly, with a faint mist in the air. I walked towards where I saw the figure, flashlight in hand, trying not to let my mind run wild. As I got closer, the air felt heavier, and there was this faint, almost electric buzz. I kept moving forward, and that's when I saw it clearly for the first time. This figure, it definitely wasn't human. It was tall, way too tall, with long limbs and a head that seemed too big, and it was glowing, not like a light bulb, but more like it had its own soft, pulsating light. I stared at it, and it turned to look at me. It had eyes, but they were just dark spots on its face. No features, no mouth, nothing. Just those eyes. We locked gazes, and it felt like it was peering into my very soul. Then, it started moving towards me, not walking, but sort of gliding like it wasn't even touching the ground. I was internally freaking out, but my feet stayed rooted to the spot. It stopped about 10 feet away from me, and then the strangest thing happened. It began to change, its shape becoming less defined, more fluid, like looking at something underwater. And then I heard it not with my ears, but in my head. "Do not fear," it said. Just those 3 words, but they were calming, soothing even. I felt confused, sure, but not scared. It stood there for a moment longer, this glowing, shape-shifting being, and then it started to fade away, like it was being absorbed into the air around it. Within moments, it was gone, vanished into thin air. I stood there for what felt like ages, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Eventually, I shook myself out of it. As I walked back to the terminal, my mind was racing. You don't just see something like that and go back to business as usual, right? The next night, I was back at the airport, and part of me hoped to see that figure again, but another part dreaded the idea. The night started off like any other, but there was this tension in the air, like something was about to happen. Around the same time as the previous night, I found myself back at that same window looking out at the runway. At first, I didn't see anything, but then there it was again, the figure standing in the same spot as before. Only this time it seemed different, more restless, like it was waiting for something, or someone. This time, I didn't hesitate, so I headed straight for the side exit and stepped outside. The air was cold with that same mist hanging around. I walked towards the figure, feeling more determined this time, and as I approached it stopped moving and turned to face me. That same shimmering appearance, but somehow less intimidating now, more familiar. It spoke to me again in my head. "You came back," it said, and the voice was the same, calm and soothing. It was weird, but I found myself nodding, like having a telepathic conversation with a glowing figure was the most natural thing in the world. "We need your help," it said. "Help? With what?" I was just a security guard, not some hero. But before I could respond, it continued. "There's something happening, something that affects your world and ours." I was about to ask what it meant when suddenly there was this sound, a low hum coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The figure reacted, its light pulsing faster. "They're coming," it said, urgency in its voice. I looked around trying to see who they were, but there was nothing. Just the empty runway and the darkness. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. Shapes like the figure emerging from the mist. They moved towards us, and there was something menacing about them. The figure beside me shifted, its form blurring and changing. "Protect yourself," it said, before moving forward to meet the other figures. I was left standing there, watching as this surreal scene unfolded. They collided, and there was a burst of light, blinding. When I could see again, they were all gone, and I was alone on the runway, with the cold night air and a million questions swirling in my head. I went back inside, unsure of what to do or think. The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Who would believe a story like that? So, that's my tale. A ghost, an alien, a product of my imagination. I don't know. But it happened, and it's something I'll never forget. I never used to believe in things that seem strange or magical even now, and I'm not quite sure what to make of what happened to me in 2006. It's like a mystery that doesn't have an answer, and it makes me feel unsure about things I once thought were certain. I'm hoping you might have some ideas, or maybe you know someone who does. I've thought about it a lot, but I still can't figure it out. There was this really big ice storm that hit central Illinois, and it was crazy. Trees were breaking, and some houses were completely covered in ice. We had to use tools just to get out of our own front door. It happened either at the end of November or the beginning of December. I can't remember exactly, but for about a month, everything was frozen solid. Then in January, there was another big storm that hit not just our area, but a lot of places in North America. It felt like winter was never going to end, but sometimes I wonder if all this weird weather is because of global warming. It makes me worry about the world we live in. Eventually, though, the ice melted and life went back to normal. More than 70 people lost their lives because of those storms. It's hard to imagine that many people being affected by something like that. But this story isn't about those people. It's about something strange that happened to me during the storm. We had a bit of warning before the storm hit. People were talking about it for weeks, and they said it was going to be really cold, but I don't think anyone expected it to be as bad as it was. I remember the night it started. I was looking in the fridge trying to decide what to eat when I realized I needed to get more food just in case. So I headed out to the store thinking I'd be back soon. But the roads were already closed and I got stuck out in the... I don't know what it was or why it was there, but ever since that night I've been haunted by the memory of it. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if it hadn't disappeared when it did. Was it watching me? Did it want something from me? Or was it just a trick of the storm, something my mind made up because I was so scared? I don't have the answers, but I hope someone out there does. Because I can't shake the feeling that there's something out there, something beyond our understanding, watching and waiting for us to find it.